The cathedral was silent except for the sound of my heels clicking against marble floors. Every seat was filled with powerful people, politicians, business leaders, the elite of New York society. But all I could see were the two faces in the back row, the faces that hadn't bothered to show up when it actually mattered. My parents sat there, mouths open in shock, as the university president prepared to unveil the building that would carry my name for generations. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me take you back to where this story really began, the day my mother told me I'd never amount to anything. Grace, honestly, we can't make it to your graduation. Your father has a golf tournament, and I'm meeting the ladies for brunch. I stood in my tiny apartment, phone pressed against my ear, feeling the familiar sting of tears I'd learned to suppress years ago. It was the same apartment where I'd lived on ramen noodles and hope for the past 4 years, working 3 jobs to put myself through college because they'd refused to help. Mom, it's my college graduation. I'm the first person in our family to finish university. Her laugh was sharp, dismissive. Sweetheart, it's just a piece of paper from a state school. It's not like you're graduating from Harvard. Besides, we already sent you a card. That should be enough. I worked so hard for this. Working hard doesn't change reality, Grace. You've always been the dreamer in the family, but your sister, now she's the practical one. She's getting married next month to a lawyer. That's what I call success. The comparison stung because it was supposed to. My younger sister, Emma, had always been the favorite, prettier, more compliant, willing to live the life our parents had scripted for her. I have to go, Mom. Tell Dad I said hi, I guess. Don't be dramatic, dear. You're 22 years old. It's time to stop expecting everyone to celebrate every little accomplishment. After she hung up, I sat on my second-hand couch and stared at my graduation cap hanging on the wall. A little accomplishment. For years of 18-hour days, of falling asleep over textbooks, of choosing between electricity and groceries, all reduced to something not worth their time. But what happened next would change everything. Because that afternoon, as I walked through Central Park trying to clear my head, I heard a sound that would redirect the entire course of my life. The little boy's scream cut through the spring air like a knife. I turned to see him tumbling from the rocky outcropping near Bow Bridge, his small body heading straight for the water below. Time seemed to slow as I watched, and for a split second, everyone around me froze. But I didn't freeze. Maybe it was the adrenaline from my mother's rejection, or maybe it was something deeper, the desperate need to prove I could save someone, even if I couldn't save myself. I ran toward the edge and dove. The water was shockingly cold for May, stealing my breath as I plunged beneath the surface. My social work training kicked in automatically. I'd taken extra lifeguard certifications because I'd known I couldn't afford to be average at anything. Being average meant being invisible, and I'd been invisible my whole life. The boy was sinking fast, his little arms flailing. I reached him in seconds, wrapping my arms around his chest and kicking hard toward the surface. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with dark curly hair and the kind of expensive clothes that told me his family had money. I've got you, I whispered against his ear as we broke the surface. You're safe now. I promise. By the time I dragged us both to shore, a crowd had gathered. Someone threw a blanket around my shoulders while another person called 911. The boy was coughing water, crying, calling for his papa, in a voice thick with an accent I couldn't quite place. You're okay, sweetheart, I soothed, checking his pulse and breathing. My hands were shaking, from cold, from adrenaline, from the overwhelming relief that we'd both made it. What's your name? And Nico, he stammered through chattering teeth. That's a beautiful name. I'm Grace. Can you tell me how old you are, Nico? He held up 6 fingers, and my heart clenched. So small, so fragile, so close to being another tragedy. The ambulance arrived within minutes, and I rode with them to the hospital, still soaked and shivering. Nico's small hand gripped mine the entire way, his dark eyes fixed on my face like I was the only solid thing in his world. You're an angel, he whispered in accented English. My angel. I squeezed his hand gently. Just a swimmer who was in the right place at the right time. What I didn't know was that Nico's father was already on his way to the hospital. What I didn't know was that I just saved the son of the most powerful man in New York City. What I didn't know was that my life was about to become something straight out of a movie I'd never have the courage to watch. At the hospital, they checked us both over. Nico was fine, scared but unharmed. I had a few bruises and a phone that would never work again, but otherwise intact. A doctor gave me dry scrubs to change into, and I was just about to call a friend for a ride home when the energy in the entire emergency room shifted. He walked in like he owned the place, and maybe he did. I'd learn later that Antonio Mafia boss had donated an entire wing to this hospital. But in that moment, all I knew was that every person in the room suddenly stood straighter, spoke quieter, moved faster. He was probably in his late 30s, tall and commanding in a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than my entire year's rent. Dark hair, darker eyes, and the kind of presence that made everyone else fade into background noise. He moved with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his life. Where is he? His voice was quiet, but it carried an authority that made nurses scramble. Room 3, Mr. Ricci. He's perfectly fine, but he was already moving, his long strides eating up the distance. I watched through the small window as he entered Nico's room and swept the little boy into his arms. Nico wrapped his legs around his father's waist and buried his face in his neck, and I saw this powerful man's shoulders shake with relief. Miss Chen. I turned to find a woman in an expensive suit standing beside me. She had kind eyes but a professional demeanor that suggested she was used to handling delicate situations. I'm Detective Sarah Morrison. I need to ask you some questions about what happened today. Over the next 20 minutes, I recounted everything, the scream, the dive, pulling Nico to safety. Detective Morrison took careful notes, her expression neutral. You're very brave, she said finally. Most people would have just called for help. Most people didn't grow up in foster care learning that if you don't save yourself, no one else will, I replied before I could stop myself. Something flickered in her eyes, understanding, maybe, or respect. Mr. Ricci would like to speak with you before you leave. Would that be okay? My heart hammered. I don't need any reward or anything. I just did what anyone would, not anyone, she interrupted gently. Trust me on that. Antonio Mafia boss's private office in the hospital was nothing like the sterile rooms outside. It had mahogany furniture, artwork that probably belonged in museums, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. I felt completely out of place in my borrowed scrubs. He stood with his back to me, staring out at Manhattan's skyline. Nico was curled up asleep on a leather couch, wrapped in a blanket, his small chest rising and falling peacefully. Grace Chen. He said my name like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. 22 years old, graduating tomorrow from New York State University with a degree in social work. Summa cum laude. Working 3 jobs to put yourself through school. No family to speak of. Is that accurate? My blood ran cold. How do you know all that? He turned to face me, and I was struck again by the intensity of his gaze. I know everything about the woman who saved my son's life. I needed to understand who you are. That's invasive. That's careful, he corrected. In my world, knowing who to trust is the difference between life and death. What world is that, exactly? A small smile played at his lips. The complicated kind. The kind where my 6-year-old son shouldn't have been able to fall into a lake because he should have had 3 bodyguards watching him. The kind where someone's negligence almost cost me everything that matters. The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. Is Nico okay? Because of you. He moved closer, and I noticed he walked with the grace of someone who'd been trained in combat. He keeps calling you his angel. He says you flew down from the sky to save him. Despite everything, I smiled. I'm afraid I'm significantly less celestial than that. Just a girl who knows how to swim. Just a girl, Antonio repeated, studying my face. You're graduating tomorrow, and your parents aren't coming. Your friends are worried about you because you've been working yourself to exhaustion. You have $17 in your bank account and a resume you've sent to 43 social work agencies, with no responses. Shame burned hot in my chest. Stop. Please. Why? Because it's uncomfortable to have someone actually see you. His voice was gentler now. You spend your life invisible, Grace. Working jobs where no one knows your name, living in a building where no one notices when you come or go. But I see you. And I owe you everything. You don't owe me anything. I'm just glad Nico's safe. But what he said next would change the trajectory of my entire life. Work for me. I blinked. I'm sorry, what? Nico needs someone, Antonio said, glancing at his sleeping son. His mother left when he was 2. Couldn't handle the reality of my life. I've had nannies, tutors, bodyguards, but what he needs is someone who actually cares. Someone who would dive into freezing water without thinking about the cost. Mr. Ricci, I don't, Antonio, he corrected. And before you say no, let me finish. You want to work in social services, helping children. I'm offering you a chance to help one child who desperately needs you, while I ensure you have everything you need to finish your education properly. I am finishing my education. I graduate tomorrow. And then what? You'll work for an underfunded agency making $30,000 a year, drowning in student loans, unable to make the difference you actually want to make. He shook his head. I'm offering you something better. Live in my guest house, watch over Nico when I travel for business, and in return, I'll pay off your student loans, give you a salary that will let you breathe for the first time in your life, and fund your master's degree at whatever university you choose. It was too much. Too generous. Too suspicious. Why? I asked flatly. What do you really want? Antonio looked at me for a long moment. I want my son to know what it feels like to be someone's priority. I want him to have what I had growing up, someone who saw me as more than a name or a legacy. You did that in those minutes in the water. You made him feel safe. I'm asking you to keep doing that. What's the catch? The catch is that my world is dangerous. Being near me, near Nico, it comes with risks. But you'd have the best security money can buy, and I promise you'd be protected. I should have said no. Every rational part of my brain screamed to walk away from this strange, intense man and his complicated life. But I thought about my tiny apartment, my student loan statements, my mother's dismissive voice saying I'd never amount to anything. And I thought about Nico's small hand gripping mine in the ambulance, his eyes looking at me like I was something worth believing in. I need time to think about it, I said finally. Antonio pulled out a business card, heavy cardstock with elegant embossing. Take all the time you need. But Grace. When you decide, and you will decide, call me directly. Don't let fear or pride get in the way of something that could change both your life and my son's. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my apartment, staring at Antonio's card, trying to logic my way through an impossible decision. On one hand, this was everything I'd worked toward, a chance to actually help someone, to make a real difference in a child's life. On the other hand, Antonio Ricci radiated danger, and getting involved with him felt like stepping off a cliff. At 3 a.m., my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. Grace Chen. An unfamiliar female voice. Yes. This is Memorial Hospital. Nico Ricci has been asking for you. He's having nightmares and won't settle down. His father is out of the country on emergency business, and we thought perhaps. I was in a cab heading to the hospital before I'd even consciously made the decision. Nico was sitting up in his hospital bed, tears streaming down his face, surrounded by concerned nurses who clearly had no idea how to comfort a traumatized child. But the moment he saw me, his face transformed. Angel. He reached for me, and I gathered him into my arms. Hey, sweetheart. I heard you needed me. I had bad dreams, he whispered against my shoulder. About the water. About falling forever. I settled onto his bed and held him close, stroking his curly hair. Want to know a secret? I used to have nightmares too. When I was little, living in places where I didn't feel safe. He pulled back to look at me. Really? Really? And you know what helped? Remembering that even in the scary moments, someone was there to catch me. Just like I caught you today. Will you stay? His dark eyes, so like his father's, were pleading. I should have called someone, should have set boundaries, should have remembered I wasn't responsible for this child. But instead, I texted the hospital number to my roommate and settled in for the night. Nico fell asleep within minutes, his small body relaxing against mine. I sat there in the quiet hospital room, watching this vulnerable child breathe, and felt something shift inside me. Some piece of my carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, "Thank you for being there for my son. Whatever you decide about my offer, I'm in your debt." I looked down at Nico's peaceful face and realized the decision had already made itself. My graduation ceremony was everything I'd imagined and nothing I'd expected. I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, summa cum laude, with a 3.97 GPA that represented 4 years of sacrifice. The auditorium was full of families cheering, cameras flashing, pride radiating from every corner. My section was empty. No parents, no sister, no one to stand when they called my name. Except, in the back row, half hidden behind other families, I spotted Antonio Ricci. And beside him, bouncing excitedly in his seat, was Nico. The little boy was holding a handmade sign that read, "Congratulations Angel Grace," in crayon with stars drawn all around the letters. They'd come. When my own family couldn't be bothered, these virtual strangers had shown up. After the ceremony, Nico ran to me and threw his arms around my waist. "You did it. Papa says you're the smartest person he knows." I looked over his head at Antonio, who was watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You came." "Of course we came," Antonio said simply. "Today matters. You matter." Something broke open inside me, some dam I'd been holding against the world. Tears spilled down my cheeks before I could stop them, and Antonio gently steered us away from the crowd, giving me space to fall apart without an audience. "I'm sorry," I gasped. "This is so stupid." It's not stupid," Antonio said firmly. "It's human. You've spent 4 years working toward this moment, and you deserve to have someone celebrate it." My parents didn't even send the card they promised, I admitted, then immediately felt foolish for sharing something so personal. But Antonio just looked at me with understanding. Their loss. Their profound, catastrophic loss. Because someday, Grace Chen, you're going to do something so remarkable that the whole world will know your name. And they'll have to live with the fact that they weren't there for any of it. "How can you possibly know that?" I asked. "Because I recognize ambition when I see it," he replied. "And I recognize people who've been underestimated their entire lives. You're going to prove everyone wrong. The question is whether you'll let me help you do it." I looked between Antonio and Nico, this powerful man and his sweet son, and felt the future shifting beneath my feet. "Okay," I said. "I'll do it. I'll work for you." Nico cheered, and Antonio smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "Good," he said. "Because we need you, Grace. More than you know." Moving into the Ricci guest house felt like stepping into a different universe. The property was in the Hamptons, sprawling and private, with an ocean view that took my breath away. The guest house was larger than any apartment I'd ever lived in, with its own kitchen, living room, bedroom suite, and a study that Antonio had filled with books on child psychology and social work. "So you can continue your education," he explained when he showed it to me. "I've already arranged for you to start your master's program at Columbia in the fall. Full scholarship, courtesy of the Ricci Foundation." I stood in the study, running my fingers over the leather-bound books, trying to process the magnitude of how my life had changed in less than a week. "Antonio, this is too much." "It's not nearly enough," he replied. "You saved my son. This is just a fraction of what that's worth to me." Over the next few months, I settled into a routine that felt surreal. My days were spent with Nico, taking him to school, helping with homework, playing in the garden, reading bedtime stories. He was brilliant and funny and surprisingly wise for 6 years old. He'd been through trauma, his mother's abandonment, the pressure of his father's reputation, the constant security that reminded him his life was different from other children's. But with me, he could just be a kid. We built blanket forts and had water balloon fights and made chocolate chip cookies that turned into disasters of flour and laughter. I watched him transform from a quiet, anxious child into someone joyful and confident. And through it all, Antonio watched us both. He traveled frequently for business he never quite explained, though I'd started to understand the rumors that surrounded his name. But when he was home, he was fully present. A devoted father who lit up when Nico ran to greet him, who remembered every story his son told him, who read bedtime stories with different voices for each character. He was also increasingly present with me. It started small, morning coffee before Nico woke up, conversations about his childhood in Sicily, nights when he'd knock on the guest house door and ask if I wanted to watch the sunset from the beach. We talked about everything and nothing. My dreams for the future, his fears about raising Nico in his world, the books we loved, the scars we carried. "Why did you really hire me?" I asked one night as we sat on the beach, watching waves crash in the moonlight. Antonio was quiet for a long time. "Because when I saw you with Nico in that hospital, I saw something I'd given up hoping existed. Someone who looked at my son and saw a child worth saving, not a political pawn or a target or a way to get to me. Just a little boy who needed help." "He's easy to love," I said softly. "So are you." The words hung between us like a confession. I turned to look at Antonio, and found him already watching me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Antonio, I know," he interrupted. "I know this complicates everything. I know I'm your employer and this crosses lines we shouldn't cross. But I need you to know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with gratitude. It's not about Nico or my debt to you. It's about who you are, your strength, your compassion, the way you face the world like you're daring it to try and break you again." "You don't really know me," I whispered. "I know you grew up in 13 different foster homes," Antonio replied. "I know you were labeled difficult because you refused to stop protecting younger kids from bullies. I know you put yourself through college with no support because you believed education was the only way out. I know you're terrified of being abandoned again, so you keep everyone at arm's length. And I know that despite everything life has thrown at you, you still dive into freezing water to save strangers. So yes, Grace, I know you. And I'm falling in love with you anyway." My heart hammered against my ribs. "This is a terrible idea." "Probably," Antonio agreed. "But I've spent my entire life being careful, making strategic decisions, protecting my interests. And it's made me powerful but empty. You make me feel human again. You make me want to be better than what I am." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his touch impossibly gentle. "I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I'm just asking you to know the truth." But what happened next would test everything we were building. Because Antonio's world was about to collide with mine in the most dangerous way possible. It started with a phone call that came at 2 a.m. I woke to pounding on my door and Antonio's urgent voice, "Grace, get dressed. We need to leave. Now." I stumbled out of bed, confused and frightened. "What's happening?" Someone leaked your identity to my enemies. They know you're important to Nico. They know you're important to me. His face was hard, controlled, but I could see the fear beneath. There was an attempt to breach the property. We stopped it, but it's not safe here anymore. Where's Nico? Already in the car with security. Come on. The next week was a blur of safe houses and security briefings. I learned the truth about Antonio's world, not just the legitimate businesses and charitable foundations, but the complicated web of power and violence that came with his name. I learned about rivals who do anything to hurt him, about the constant calculation required to keep his family safe. I also learned that Antonio had been protecting me without me realizing it. The job offers that suddenly started coming my way from prestigious agencies. The scholarship to Columbia that happened to cover everything. The apartment I'd been about to lose that suddenly had its back rent mysteriously paid. You've been managing my life, I said, hurt and angry during one of our arguments. I've been keeping you alive, Antonio shot back. I've been making sure you had the opportunities you deserved while also ensuring my enemies couldn't use you against me. I'm not a child who needs managing. You're the woman I love who refuses to see how extraordinary she is. Antonio's control finally cracked. You walk through the world like you're apologizing for existing, like you don't deserve safety or success or love. Well, I'm sorry, but I refuse to watch you settle for less than everything when I have the power to give it to you. That's not love, I said coldly. That's control. The look on his face made me regret the words immediately. You're right, he said quietly. I've overstepped. I'll have my team arrange separate accommodation for you, and we can discuss a transition plan for Nico's care. He walked away, and I felt like the ground had opened beneath my feet. I spent 3 days in a hotel suite, refusing to take Antonio's calls, trying to logic my way through feelings that defied logic. He'd manipulated aspects of my life, yes. But he'd also seen me more clearly than anyone ever had. He'd celebrated my graduation when my own parents couldn't be bothered. He'd created space for me to become the person I wanted to be. And I'd fallen in love with him too, even though I'd been too scared to admit it. It was Nico who broke the stalemate. He showed up at my hotel with one of Antonio's security team, his small face tear-stained and desperate. Please come home, he begged, throwing himself into my arms. Papa is sad and I'm sad and nothing is right without you. Oh, sweetheart, I held him tight, my own tears falling. I'm not leaving you, I promise. Then why did you go away? Because I was scared. Because loving people means they can hurt you. Because I'm still that foster kid who learned not to trust good things. But I didn't say any of that to Nico. Instead, I said, sometimes grown-ups need time to figure things out. But I'm coming home now, okay? When we returned to the Hampton house, Antonio was standing on the porch looking like he hadn't slept in days. Nico ran to him, and Antonio scooped him up, but his eyes never left my face. After Nico was settled with a movie, Antonio and I stood on the beach where he'd first told me he loved me. I'm sorry, we said in unison, then both laughed shakily. Let me go first, Antonio said. You were right. I overstepped. I got so caught up in trying to protect you and provide for you that I forgot to just respect you. You don't need me to fix your life. You've been fixing it yourself since you were a child. And I'm sorry for running, I replied. For assuming the worst instead of talking to you. For letting my fear make me cruel. Antonio reached for my hands, his touch careful. I meant what I said. I love you. Not because you saved Nico, not because you're good with him, but because you're brilliant and fierce and you make me want to be worthy of you. But I'll love you on whatever terms you can handle. If that means just friendship, I'll take it. I looked at this powerful, dangerous man who'd somehow become my anchor, and felt the last of my walls crumble. I love you too, I whispered. And it terrifies me. Good, Antonio said, pulling me close. Love should be terrifying. It means we have something worth protecting. He kissed me then, gentle and claiming all at once, and I felt something inside me finally settle. Like I'd been searching for home my entire life and finally found it in the most unlikely place. 2 years later, I stood in that same cathedral where this story began, but now you know the full context. Now you understand why my parents looked so shocked in that back row. Because the building being dedicated wasn't just any building. It was the new Graduate School of Social Work at Columbia University, and it bore my name, the Grace Chin Center for Child Advocacy and Family Support. I'd spent those 2 years completing my master's degree while working with at-risk youth in some of New York's most underserved communities. I'd published research on foster care reform that had caught national attention. I'd testified before Congress about the need for better support systems for aging out youth. And through it all, Antonio and Nico had been my foundation, cheering every success, holding me through every setback, reminding me I was never alone. The university president finished his speech about my contributions to the field, about the lives I'd already changed, about the future social workers who would learn in this building. Then he pulled the silk cloth off the bronze plaque that bore my name and my mission statement: every child deserves someone who refuses to give up on them. The applause was thunderous. My colleagues stood. The dean of the school was crying. And in the front row, Antonio held Nico on his lap, both of them beaming with pride. But I was looking at the back row, where my mother and father sat in stunned silence. They'd come because they'd seen the news coverage, because they wanted to be associated with my success now that it was public and prestigious. My sister Emma sat beside them, her lawyer husband looking bored. After the ceremony, they tried to approach me. My mother opened her arms like we were close, like she hadn't spent my entire life making me feel inadequate. "Grace, sweetheart, we're so proud, stop." My voice was quiet but firm. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to claim pride in something you had no part in building." "Don't be dramatic," my father said dismissively. "We're your parents. Of course we're proud." "You didn't come to my college graduation," I said clearly. "You called my degree just a piece of paper. You told me I'd never amount to anything. So no, you don't get to stand here now and pretend you believed in me." "Grace," my mother tried again. But Antonio appeared at my side, Nico's hand in his. "I think Grace has made herself clear. She's given you more courtesy than you deserve simply by allowing you to attend." My father's face reddened. "And who are you to speak to us like that?" "I'm the man who was there when it mattered," Antonio replied calmly. "I'm the man who celebrated her graduation when you couldn't be bothered. I'm the man who gets to watch her change the world every single day. And I'm the man who's going to ask her to marry me as soon as we leave this cathedral." My breath caught. Nico giggled. And my parents looked like they'd been slapped. Antonio turned to me, his dark eyes warm. "Sorry for the terrible timing. But I refuse to let them have another minute of your attention when we have a celebration to get to." He was right. We had Nico's 8th birthday party to attend, I had a new cohort of graduate students starting tomorrow, and I had a life I'd built from scratch waiting for me. I took Antonio's hand and Nico's hand and we walked out of that cathedral together, leaving my parents standing in the shadow of a building that bore my name. As we emerged into the sunshine, Nico looked up at me. "Are you going to say yes, Grace?" I looked at Antonio, this man who'd seen me when I was invisible, who'd loved me through my fear, who'd given me the space to become exactly who I was meant to be. "Yes," I said. "Absolutely yes. Here's what I learned through all of this: family isn't about blood. It's about the people who show up. It's about the ones who celebrate your victories and hold you through your defeats. It's about choosing each other every single day, even when it's hard." My parents taught me what I didn't want to be. But Antonio and Nico taught me what was possible, that I could be loved not despite my past, but because of how it shaped me. That my struggles made me stronger, not weaker. That the little girl who survived 13 foster homes could grow into a woman who changed systems and saved lives. To every woman who's been told she's not enough, you are. To every girl who's been overlooked, you're extraordinary. To everyone who's had to save themselves, that strength is your superpower. The Grace Chin Center opened its doors the following fall. We provided full scholarships to former foster youth, created support systems for first-generation students, and built a community where everyone belonged. On opening day, I stood in the lobby with Antonio and Nico beside me, looking at the photo wall of students we'd already helped. "Your angel is changing the world," Nico whispered to his father, not realizing I could hear. "Our angel," Antonio corrected, squeezing my hand. "And she's just getting started." He was right. Because this wasn't the end of my story, it was just the beginning. The beginning of a life where I was seen, valued, and loved. The beginning of creating the support systems I'd wished for as a child. The beginning of proving that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. My name is Grace Chin. I used to be invisible. Now I'm impossible to ignore. And every day, I wake up and choose to dive into the deep water, because I know now that I'm strong enough to save both myself and others. The best revenge isn't cruelty, it's becoming so successful that your doubters can't ignore you. It's building something so meaningful that it outlasts their criticism. It's living so fully that their rejection becomes irrelevant. My parents didn't break me. They forged me. And I used that forge to build something beautiful. That's the real story. That's the truth they don't want you to know, that you don't need their approval to be extraordinary. You just need to believe in yourself long enough to prove them wrong. And trust me, you will.